What if I told you that Hollywood's greatest stars weren't just unlucky with money? What if there was a system deliberately designed to destroy them? After researching these 17 stories, I found a pattern so disturbing that the industry spent decades covering it up. While researching these stories, I discovered something Hollywood desperately wanted to bury. There's a sinister pattern connecting every single collapse. I'll reveal it when we get to star number 10, and trust me, it's going to change how you see every classic film. But first, let's start with the innocent man who lost everything because of lies, Roscoe Fatty Arbuckle, the $3 million nightmare. September 1921, Roscoe Fatty Arbuckle was living every performer's dream. He just signed with Paramount Pictures for $3 million. That's about $50 million today. Think about that. $50 million. He was set for several lifetimes. Arbuckle wasn't just successful, he was beloved. Audiences adored this gentle giant who'd mentored Charlie Chaplin and discovered Buster Keaton. Kids wanted to be him, adults felt like he was their friend. He had this warmth that just radiated from the screen. Labor Day weekend 1921, the St. Francis Hotel in San Francisco. Arbuckle threw a party to celebrate his new contract. Nothing unusual there. Hollywood parties were legendary even back then. Bootleg liquor flowing, jazz music playing, everyone having a grand time. This was Prohibition, remember? So these gatherings were already risky. September 5th, around 3 hours in the afternoon, a young actress named Virginia Rapp became ill at the party. She was in tremendous pain. They called a doctor immediately. 4 days later, she passed away from internal complications. That's when William Randolph Hearst entered the picture. Hearst despised Arbuckle. Some say it was professional jealousy. Others claim Arbuckle had snubbed one of Hearst's events. Whatever the reason, Hearst saw an opportunity for destruction. His newspaper empire, and Hearst controlled many papers, printed the most vicious lies imaginable. They painted Arbuckle as a monster. One headline actually read, "Arbuckle the Beast held for serious charges." They fabricated stories so horrific I won't repeat them here. None of it was true. Not a single word. The public turned overnight. The same people who'd laughed at his movies now wanted his head. Theater owners refused to show his films. Threatening letters poured in. His wife left him. Friends disappeared like smoke. But here's what really happened in that hotel room. According to actual evidence, nothing criminal. Arbuckle wasn't even alone with Rapp. Other people were present the entire time. The prosecution's star witness had a criminal record for extortion and couldn't even testify because her story kept changing. First trial, hung jury 10-2 for acquittal. Second trial, hung jury again, 10-2 for acquittal. Think about that. Even with all the terrible press-poisoning potential jurors, most people who heard the actual evidence thought he was innocent. Third trial. The jury deliberated for 6 minutes. 6 minutes. They wanted him an apology. Acquittal is not enough for Roscoe Arbuckle. We feel that a great injustice has been done him. We feel also that it was only our plain duty to give him this exoneration under the evidence, for there was not the slightest proof adduced to connect him in any way with the commission of a crime. But innocence didn't matter anymore. The damage was done. Those 3 trials cost him $700,000 in legal fees. Over $10 million today, every penny of that $3 million contract gone, plus more. He had to sell everything. Houses, cars, even his clothes. The studios blacklisted him completely. The man who'd been Hollywood's highest-paid actor couldn't get work as an extra. Will Hayes, the movie censor, banned Arbuckle from screens. Even after his acquittal, said it was for the good of the industry. His existing films were pulled from theaters and often destroyed. Imagine your life's work just burned. He tried directing under the fake name William Goodrich. Will Be Good, that was as close to his real name as he dared get. Made comedy shorts for tiny studios working for pennies compared to his former salary. Then in 1933 it looked like redemption might be possible. Warner Brothers offered him a feature film contract. 6 real comedies to start, then features if those went well. Arbuckle was ecstatic. He'd waited 12 years for this second chance. June 28, 1933, Arbuckle completed his first day filming In the Dough. The crew said he was brilliant, like he'd never been away. That night, he went to bed happy for the first time in over a decade. June 29, 1933, Roscoe Arbuckle passed away in his sleep from heart failure. He was 46 years old. The $3 million man departed this world with almost nothing to his name. His second wife had to borrow money for the funeral. All because of lies that William Randolph Hearst printed to sell newspapers. But Arbuckle's destruction was just the beginning. The same system that crushed him had perfected its techniques by the time they got to our next star, Mickey Rooney betrayal by those who should have protected him. Mickey Rooney. Just saying his name makes me smile and then immediately feel heartbroken. This man should have lived out his days as a billionaire. Instead, he became a victim of the cruelest betrayal imaginable. Let's talk numbers first because they're staggering. Between 1939 and 1941, Mickey was the #1 box office star worldwide. Not America, the world. He generated more money for MGM than Clark Gable, Joan Crawford, and Greta Garbo combined. The Andy Hardy series made MGM over $75 million. That's over $1 billion today. Mickey was earning $5,000 a week as a teenager. In 1940, that's like $100,000 weekly today. By 21, he'd earned $3 million. So where did it all go? Well, first there were the wives, 8 of them. Mickey loved being married. He just wasn't very good at staying married. His first wife was Ava Gardner. Yes, that Ava Gardner. She left him after a year, taking a substantial settlement. Then came Betty Jane Race, who received $12,000 monthly in alimony in 1940s money. Each divorce was more expensive than the last. By the time he married his 8th wife, John, in 1978, he joked that he was the only man in Hollywood whose alimony payments exceeded the national debt. But the divorces were nothing compared to his real problem, gambling. Mickey would bet on anything. Horses, cards, sports. If you could gamble on it, Mickey did. He'd lose $50,000 in a weekend and laugh it off. Once he lost $65,000 on a single horse race. His friends tried interventions, but Mickey would just flash that $1 million smile and say, "Easy come, easy go." Except it wasn't coming easy anymore. By the 1950s, Murr had faded. He was too old for teenager roles, too short for traditional leading men. Television was changing everything. The phone stopped ringing, but the bills didn't stop coming. 1962 first bankruptcy. In court documents, Mickey had to list his assets and debts. Assets $500, debts $464,914. In today's money, that's nearly $5 million in debt. What does someone who earned millions end up with $500? Financial mismanagement and theft. That's how his business manager had been stealing for years. When Mickey finally discovered it and fired him, everything was gone. But Mickey didn't quit. He went on the road, dinner theater, nightclub acts, county fairs. He'd perform anywhere that would pay him. Through the 70s and 80s, he rebuilt, did Sugar Babies on Broadway with Ann Miller, won an Emmy for Bill, started getting character parts again. Then came 1996, second bankruptcy. This time, bad investments plus more gambling debts. Mickey was 76 and starting from zero again. But the worst was yet to come. In the 2000s, Mickey married his 8th wife, Jan. Her son, Christopher Ray Bear, became Mickey's manager. That's when the real nightmare began. Christopher and his wife took control of Mickey's life. They controlled his money, his medication, his phone calls. Mickey later testified that they wouldn't let him leave the house, wouldn't let him buy food, wouldn't even let him choose his own clothes. Here's what makes me absolutely furious. They were stealing from him. While Mickey was being denied basic necessities, Christopher was taking his Social Security checks, his residual payments, his appearance fees. We're talking about $8.5 million over several years. $8.5 million stolen from a 90-year-old man who'd already lost everything twice. Mickey finally escaped, literally escaped, with friends' help in 2011. He showed up at the courthouse with bruises. This legend, who'd entertained America for 8 decades, was being physically mistreated by his own family. He testified before Congress about elder abuse. Imagine that scene. Mickey Rooney, 90 years old, the man who'd made America smile during the Depression, having to beg lawmakers to protect people like him. I felt trapped, scared, used, and frustrated, he told them. But above all, I felt helpless. For years, I suffered silently, unable to muster the courage to seek the help I knew I needed. Mickey passed away on April 6, 2014. He was 93. His estate was valued at $18,000. The man who generated over $1 billion in revenue left this world with less money than a new car cost. But Mickey's exploitation was systematic and deliberate, just like what MGM did to our next star from the time she was 10 years old. Judy Garland, somewhere over the rainbow. Everything fell apart. Judy Garland. Even saying her name makes me emotional because if anyone deserved better, it was Judy. Frances Ethel Gum, that was her real name, was performing on stage when she was 2 years old. 2. By 10, She was signed to MGM. Louis B. Mayer himself said she had the greatest voice he'd ever heard. But that voice came attached to a little girl who didn't look like MGM's idea of a star. She wasn't pretty enough. They said too heavy. Teeth needed fixing. So they fixed her. Stimulants to keep her thin. Benzodrine, basically. When she couldn't sleep from the uppers, they gave her sedatives. When she was too groggy from the downers, more stimulants. By 13, Judy was completely dependent on prescription medications created by MGM's studio doctors. Here's something that'll make your blood boil. They called her terrible names to her face. Louis B. Mayer would verbally abuse her in front of people. She was 14 years old, but she made the money. Oh, did she make the money? The Wizard of Oz alone generated millions for MGM. Her films with Mickey Rooney were box office gold. The studio was making roughly $100 million annually from her films. In 1940s money, that's over $1 billion today. So what was Judy making? $500 a week. That's it. While generating hundreds of millions, she was taking home $500 weekly. And most of that went to her mother, who was also taking advantage of her financially. By the time Judy understood what was happening, it was too late. Her mother had signed contracts that basically made Judy a slave to MGM. She couldn't work elsewhere, couldn't refuse roles, couldn't even marry without studio permission. The medication dependency got worse. By her 20s, she was taking 40 Roland daily, 40 plus barbiturates to sleep, plus whatever else the doctors gave her. She'd collapse on set, miss days of filming, MGM's solution, more substances to keep her going. 5 marriages, each one more disastrous than the last. Her husbands all seemed to share the same profession, spending Judy's money. But the real villain in Judy's story, the IRS. When you're making money, but you're also struggling with dependency and handlers stealing from you, taxes don't get paid. By 1960, Judy owed the IRS $500,000. They seized her house. They garnished her wages. They took everything. Here's Judy Garland in the 1960s. Homeless. Literally homeless. The woman who sang Over the Rainbow was sleeping on friends' couches because the IRS had taken her home. She'd perform anywhere for any amount just to eat. There's a story from 1968 that breaks my heart. Judy was performing at a small London club called Talk of the Town. She was so broke she couldn't afford a hotel, so she was sleeping in the club's dressing room. The woman who'd been MGM's biggest star was literally living in a nightclub. She met a younger man named Mickey Deans who promised to manage her career, get her back on top. They married in March 1969. 3 months later, she was gone. June 22nd, 1969, Mickey Deans found Judy in the bathroom of their rented London flat. Accidental overdose of barbiturates, the same medications MGM had started giving her when she was 10. She was 47. When they went through her belongings, she had $40,000 in debts and no assets. Nothing. The woman whose voice had generated hundreds of millions passed away with nothing but the substances that ended her life. Drop a comment if you think MGM should have been held responsible for what they did to Judy, because the studio system destroyed our next star too, but in a completely different way. Veronica Lake, the Peekaboo Girl's heartbreaking fall. You know that iconic image, the blonde bombshell with hair cascading over one eye? That was Veronica Lake, and she didn't just have a hairstyle, she had a phenomenon. During World War II, her peekaboo look was so popular, it became a national security issue. I'm not joking. So many women working in factories copied her style that they were getting their hair caught in machinery. The government actually asked Veronica to change her hairstyle for the war effort. She did like the patriot she was, and it damaged her career momentum. But let's back up. In 1943, Veronica was earning $4,500 weekly. That's about $75,000 today per week. She lived in a mansion, drove custom cars, wore designer, everything. Her films with Alan Ladd were printing money for Paramount. She was also impossible to work with, and I don't mean diva behavior though. There was that too. Veronica was 4'11", tiny. Most leading men towered over her, so they had to dig trenches for them to walk in or have her stand on boxes. Alan Ladd was one of the few short enough to work with her easily. But here's what destroyed her, and nobody talks about this. She was too independent for Hollywood's games. Directors would tell her to play dumb, and she'd refuse. Producers would suggest she attend certain parties, those kinds of parties, and she'd laugh in their faces. In the 1940s, that kind of independence from a woman was career elimination. By 1948, her mother was suing her for support, making thousands weekly, and her own mother had to take her to court for money. Where was it all going? Well, Veronica had developed a serious drinking problem. She was showing up to sets intoxicated, missing call times. One director said she was the most beautiful woman in Hollywood and the most unemployable. Paramount didn't renew her contract. 1950 was when the real slide began. She married director Andre Doth, who was supposed to save her career. Instead, he spent what was left of her money. All of it, every penny she'd saved, every investment she'd made gone. Dympische bankruptcy, the mansion gone. The cars repossessed, the jewelry sold. She had to list her assets in court. You know what? She had $500 and the clothes on her back from $4,500 weekly to $500 total. She fled to New York thinking she could start over on Broadway. But her reputation had preceded her. No one would hire the difficult former star, so she took the only job she could get as a cocktail waitress at the Martha Washington Hotel's bar. Picture this. You're having a drink after work in a modest Manhattan hotel bar. Your waitress brings your martini. You look up, and it's Veronica Lake. The woman who defined glamour for an entire generation is serving you drinks for tips. One regular customer recognized her and asked, "What are you doing here?" Her response, "Making a living? What are you doing here?" Still had that fire even then. The drinking got worse. How could it not? She'd gone from signing autographs to cleaning up after businessmen. From premieres to pouring beers, she'd stumbled through her shifts. And eventually, even that job was gone. She drifted from bar to bar, each one seedier than the last. By the 1960s, she was working in New York's Bowery, Skid Row, rock bottom for someone who'd once been at the very top. Her children, she had 3, were estranged. She'd been a terrible mother, she admitted that. Too focused on her career when she had one, too intoxicated when she didn't. Veronica was living in Vermont, trying to stay sober. She was working on her autobiography, hoping to make a little money from her story, but her body was failing. Years of drinking had destroyed her liver. July 7th, 1973, Veronica Lake passed away from liver complications at Burlington Hospital. She was 50 years old. When they went through her belongings, she had exactly $7 to her name. But here's the part that really breaks your heart. Her ashes sat unclaimed at the funeral home for over a year. Why? Because there was no money to pay for them. Her son couldn't afford to fly from Arizona without taking out a loan. The woman who'd once spent $7 on a single cocktail left this world with exactly that amount to her name. Quick question for you. Did you know Veronica Lake had worked as a cocktail waitress? Drop a comment if this shocked you, because wait until you hear what happened to our next comedy legend, Buster Keaton, the great Stoneface's silent tragedy. Buster Keaton never smiled on screen. That was his thing. The great Stoneface, they called him. But what he could do with his body, with timing, with a camera. Pure genius doesn't even begin to cover it. In 1920, Buster was given his own production company by Joseph Schenck. Complete creative control. His own studio. Unlimited budget to make whatever he wanted, and what he made were masterpieces. The General Steamboat, Bill Jr., the cameraman film still studied in schools today. He was making $3,000 weekly plus percentages. His movies were profitable. Critics loved him, and he had complete artistic freedom. He'd bought a mansion in Beverly Hills. They called it the Italian Villa. 20 rooms, 6 bathrooms, tennis courts, swimming pool, the works. Then came 1928 and everything collapsed. First disaster. His marriage to Natalie Talmadge was falling apart. Natalie was Hollywood royalty. Her sisters were Norma and Constance Talmadge, huge stars. When Buster married Natalie, he thought he was marrying into Hollywood's first family. Instead, he married into a family of financial predators. Natalie spent money like water. $1,000 dresses when that could buy a car. Jewelry costing more than houses. She redecorated the Italian villa 3 times in 2 years because she was bored with it. When they divorced in 1932, Natalie took him for everything. The Italian villa went to her, the cars her again, most of his savings also to her. But the cruelest blow, she got custody of their 2 sons and changed their last names from Keaton to Talmadge. She literally erased him from his children's lives. But that wasn't even the worst thing that happened in 1928. Joseph Schenck, his producer and supposed friend, convinced Buster to sign with MGM. "It'll be great," Schenck said. "Bigger budgets, bigger distribution, more money." What he didn't mention was that he was getting a huge payout from MGM for delivering Buster. The moment Buster signed that contract, his career was over. MGM took away his creative control. They assigned him directors who didn't understand visual comedy. They put him in talking pictures where the focus was dialogue, not the physical comedy that was Buster's genius. They made him do scenes repeatedly until all spontaneity was gone. His first MGM film, The Cameraman, was actually good because Buster managed to maintain some control. But after that, disaster after disaster. Then Irving Thalberg, MGM's boy genius producer, made a decision that finished what was left of Buster's career. He paired Buster with a series of films. Durant was loud, brash, never stopped talking, everything Buster wasn't. It was like pairing a symphony with a car alarm. The reviews were brutal. Audiences stayed away. By 1933, MGM fired him. Not just fired, they made sure everyone knew he was unreliable. That was code for having a drinking problem, which by then, Buster did. The drinking had started during the divorce. Got worse at MGM. By 1933, Buster Keaton, one of cinema's three great silent comedians alongside Chaplin and Lloyd, was unemployable for the next 30 years. 30 years, Buster took whatever work he could get. Gag writer for the Marx Brothers' uncredited bit parts, where he was the butt of the joke. In Sunset Boulevard, he plays himself as one of the waxworks, the forgotten silent stars. That wasn't acting. That was his life. He worked at Columbia as a gag writer for $100 weekly. The man who'd owned his own studio was writing jokes for comedians who weren't fit to polish his shoes. Television threw him some bones in the 50s, guest spots where they'd trot him out as a curiosity. Look, kid's a real silent movie star. He did commercials. There's one for Alka-Seltzer where he's literally playing a washed-up silent star. They weren't even trying to hide it. When he passed away on February 1st, 1966, he was living in a modest house in Woodland Hills, getting by on Social Security and tiny residuals. The master of silent comedy left this world in near silence. His genius recognized too late to save him. Here's the kicker. Today, film scholars consider Buster Keaton one of the greatest filmmakers who ever lived. His films are studied, analyzed, war-ripped. Too bad that recognition came 40 years too late. At least Buster passed away sober. The same can't be said for our next star, whose addiction was so legendary they made it into entertainment. Barbara Lamar, too beautiful to live. They called her the girl who is too beautiful. Think about that for a second. Not beautiful, not very beautiful, too beautiful. Like beauty could be a curse. For Barbara Lamar, it absolutely was. Born Riata Dale Watson in 1896, and already we're starting with lies because she claimed she was born in 1900. She had more names than a spy. Rhea Watson. Beth Watson, Barbara Lamar Day, Barbara Lamar. Die. Every time her life fell apart, she'd pick a new name and start over. By the time she hit Hollywood in 1920, she'd already been married 3 times. The first time she was 16 to Jack Lell, he was arrested for bigamy. Turns out he was already married. Marriage and second husband passed away. Third one she left all before she turned 24. But when Hollywood saw her face, none of that mattered. She was impossibly beautiful. Not pretty, beautiful in a way that made people stop and stare. Louis B. Mayer's her picture and immediately signed her to MGM. Didn't even need a screen test. The problem was Barbara lived like she was racing against time. And in a way she was. She'd be gone at 29. Her mansion in the Hollywood Hills was the site of parties that went on for days, not hours, days. She allegedly kept stimulants in a crystal bowl on her piano like other people kept candy. Guests would help Barbara played. She was actually a talented pianist. Her daily routine was insane. She'd wake up at noon, take stimulants to get going, work at the studio until 8 or 9, party until dawn, take sedatives to sleep for a few hours, wake up, and do it again. She once went 5 days without sleeping, 5 days. The studio loved her because she'd work 18-hour days without complaining. What they didn't realize or didn't care was that she could only do it because she was under the influence the entire time. By 1925, she was married to her 5th husband. 5 husbands by age 29, each marriage was more chaotic than the last. She adopted a baby, had a biological son, and basically left them to be raised by nannies while she worked and partied. The substances were destroying her looks. The face, too beautiful, was becoming gaunt, hollow. Her eyes, once luminous, were glassy and unfocused. She was aging at hyperspeed. By 28, she looked 40. The studios started noticing. She was forgetting lines, missing marks, showing up late or not at all. Her last completed film was The Girl from Mool in 1926. After that, she was too unreliable to hire. January 1926, Barbara checked into a sanitarium for exhaustion. That was Hollywood code for substance withdrawal. But it was too late. Her body was shutting down. Tuberculosis, nephritis, kidney failure, all exacerbated by the substances. She spent her last days writing her autobiography. Want to know what she called it? My life story, Flames of Passion. Even near the end, she was dramatic. She wrote about her beauty like it was a separate entity that had possessed her. I was a little fool, she wrote, with a beautiful body and a beautiful face. January 30th, 1926. Barbara Lamar passed away at Aladina Hospital. She was 29 or 33, depending on which birth date you believe. Her funeral was Hollywood spectacle. Thousands of fans, elaborate flowers, everyone pretending they hadn't watched her destroy herself. Her estate was in chaos. 5 ex-husbands fighting over nothing. She'd spent everything on substances and parties. Her children were parceled out to relatives. The mansion was sold for debts. The girl, who was too beautiful, had burned through life at triple speed, leaving nothing but ashes and abandoned children. Barbara chose her destruction. But our next star was completely innocent when scandal destroyed her. Mabel Normand, the comedy pioneer's unjust end. If you've ever laughed at a pie-in-the-face gag, you can thank Mabel Normand. She invented it. She also directed Charlie Chaplin in his early films. Bet you didn't know that. This woman was a comedy genius who got erased from history because of scandals that weren't even her fault. Mabel started at Biograph Studios in 1910 working with D.W. Griffith and Max Sennett. By 1912, she was Keystone's biggest star and Sennett's unofficial co-director. She didn't get credit, of course. Women didn't get directing credits then, but everyone knew Mabel was the creative force behind many of the Keystone Cops comedies. She was making $1,000 weekly by 1918. Huge money for a woman then. She had her own production company, creative control, and the respect of everyone in the industry. Chaplin said she taught him more about comedy timing in a month than he'd learned in years on stage. Then came February 1st, 1922, the night that started her downfall. Mabel had dinner with director William Desmond Taylor at his bungalow. They were friends, possibly lovers. Nobody knows for sure. She left around 7:45 p.m. The next morning, Taylor was found gone, shot in the back. Mabel wasn't a suspect. She had an alibi, witnesses, everything, but the press linked her name to the crime anyway. Mabel Normand last to see Taylor alive. The headlines screamed. Suddenly she wasn't a comedy star. She was the woman connected to Hollywood's most sensational unsolved case. The case was never solved. Theories abounded. His secretary did it. The mob did it. A jealous lover did it. But Mabel's name was forever tainted by association. She tried to keep working, made a few more films. Then came January 1st, 1924, New Year's Day, the second scandal that finished her completely. Mabel was at a party at the home of millionaire Cortlandt Dane. Also, there was her chauffeur, Joe Kelly, who also happened to be her sometime lover, Edna Purviance. Chaplin's leading lady was there too. Suddenly, gunshots! Dane had been shot. The weapon, it belonged to Mabel. The shooter, her chauffeur, Kelly. The story was complicated. Something about Dines making advances on Edna, Kelly defending her honor. Alcohol involved. Everybody's story different, but the headlines were simple. Mabel Normand's chauffeur shoots millionaire with her gun. Mabel wasn't even in the room when it happened. She was completely innocent of any wrongdoing. Didn't matter. 2 scandals were too many. The studios declared her box office poison. No one would hire her. Not for starring roles, not for supporting parts, not even for gag writing. The woman who taught Chaplin comedy, who'd invented the pie fight, who'd been one of Hollywood's first female directors, unemployable. She was already fighting tuberculosis. The stress made it worse. The drinking, and there was a lot of drinking, made it worse still. By 1929, she could barely leave her house. Her friends abandoned her. The industry she'd helped build pretended she didn't exist. When talkies arrived, nobody even asked if she wanted to try. She was already erased. February 23, 1930, Mabel Normand passed away in Pottinger Sanitarium in Monrovia, California. She was 37. The official cause was tuberculosis, but everyone knew the truth. She passed away of a broken heart and Hollywood's betrayal. Sam Goldwyn, one of the few who remembered what she'd contributed, paid for her funeral. Her pallbearers included Max Sennett, Buster Keaton, and Harold Lloyd, the men whose careers she'd helped launch. The woman who taught Hollywood how to be funny passed away broke and forgotten because of scandals that weren't even her fault. Speaking of injustice, wait until you hear about our next star's final tragedy, Lupe Vélez, the Mexican Spitfire's final act. Lupe Vélez was pure fire. Born Maria Guadalupe Villalobos in Mexico, she came to Hollywood in 1926 and immediately set the place ablaze. Not metaphorically, though, that too, but literally. She once set fire to Gary Cooper's suits when she caught him cheating. That was Lupe, passionate, tempestuous, absolutely alive. She became famous for the Mexican Spitfire series, 8 films where she played variations of the same hot-tempered Latina stereotype. It was demeaning, sure, but it paid well. $7,500 per film by 1943, she was one of the few Latin stars who was actually working consistently. But Lupe wanted more than comedy. She wanted to be taken seriously as an actress. She'd had dramatic successes. The Gaucho with Douglas Fairbanks, Lady of the Pavements with D.W.'s Griffith, but Hollywood saw her as the funny Mexican girl. And that's all they'd let her be. Her love life was legendary. Affairs with Gary Cooper, John Gilbert, Errol Flynn. She married Johnny Weiss Muller, Tarzan himself, in 1933. That marriage was like 2 tornadoes colliding. Passionate fights, passionate reconciliations, furniture thrown, police called. They divorced in 1939, but the drama never stopped. By 1944, Lupe was 36. In Hollywood terms, especially for a Latin actress who played fiery young women, she was aging out. The roles were drying up, the Mexican Spitfire series had ended. She was looking at a future of diminishing returns. Then she discovered she was pregnant. The father was Harold Ramon, a young Austrian actor she'd been dating. When she told him, he made it clear he wasn't marrying her. Not now, not ever. For Lupe, this was catastrophic, not just personally, though that was bad enough, but professionally and socially. This was 1944. An unmarried, pregnant Catholic Mexican woman. Her career would be over. Her family would disown her. The scandal would destroy everything she'd built. She tried everything, begged Harold to marry her, offered to pay him, threatened him. Nothing worked. He was 27. His career was just starting, and he wasn't going to saddle himself with a 36-year-old has-been and a baby. December 13th, 1944, Lupe had dinner with friends at her home, Casa Felicitas. Happy House, she'd named it, which now seems heartbreakingly ironic. She was cheerful, laughing, typical Lupe. Nobody suspected anything. After her guests left, Lupe went to her bedroom. She arranged herself carefully on her bed. She was still a star, still conscious of how she'd look. She'd had her hair done that day, put on her best negligee, arranged flowers around the bed. Then she took 75-second tablets. 75. She left several notes to Harold. May God forgive you, and forgive me too. But I prefer to take my life away and our babies before I bring him with shame or ending his life. To her secretary, you and only you know the reason for my desperate action. To the public, to all my friends, and to the public, I did this because I was tired of life. Her maid, Juanita, found her the next morning. She looked so peaceful, so perfectly arranged that the first police officer on scene thought she was a doll lying on the bed. Even in her final moments, Lupe had staged the scene. The scandal, of course, exploded anyway. The tragic end made headlines worldwide. Harold Ramon's career was destroyed. Nobody would hire the man who'd driven Lupe Vélez to take her own life. He ended up leaving Hollywood entirely. There's a horrible, probably false story that Kenneth Anger spread in Hollywood Babylon about Lupe's final moments being undignified. It's not true. The coroner's report is clear. She passed away in her bed exactly as she'd arranged herself. Even her final act was a performance, and she'd executed it perfectly. The Mexican Spitfire, that force of nature who'd blazed across Hollywood screens for almost 20 years, chose to extinguish her own flame rather than face a world that wouldn't accept her as she was. If that tragedy makes you angry, wait until you hear what our next star did with his Oscar, Emil Jennings, the Oscar winner's ultimate disgrace. This one's different from all the others. Emil Jennings didn't just lose his fortune, he lost his soul. And he did it deliberately. Emil was the first person ever to win the Academy Award for Best Actor, the very first in 1928, beat out Charlie Chaplin and John Barrymore. He won for 2 films, The Last Command and The Way of All Flesh. He was that good. He was also making $200,000 per film at Paramount. That's about $3 million per film today. He was cultured, sophisticated, spoke multiple languages, the kind of actor who elevated everything he was in. But Emil had one fatal flaw: his accent. His thick German accent was fine in silent films. Nobody could hear it. But when talkies arrived in 1929, Emil was finished in Hollywood. His English was so heavily accented that audiences laughed when he spoke. So he went home to Germany in 1929, clutching that Oscar, thinking he'd continue his career in German films. And he did for a while. When the Nazis rose to power in 1933, Emil had a choice. Many German artists fled. Marlene Dietrich, Fritz Lang, Billy Wilder, they saw what was coming and got out. Emil stayed. Not just stayed, he embraced the Nazi regime, became Goebbels' favorite actor. The propaganda minister loved that Emil had conquered Hollywood and come home to the fatherland. That Oscar became a Nazi propaganda tool. Emil starred in Nazi propaganda films. Der Herrscher the Ruler in 1937, Kruger in 1941, a violently anti-British film about the Boer War where Emil played the title role. These weren't just regular films made during the Nazi era, these were propaganda. Pieces designed to spread hate. He was paid handsomely. Given a beautiful estate, awarded the title of Artist of the State, he'd carry that Oscar everywhere, showing it off. At Nazi party functions, the first Best Actor winner had become a willing tool of evil when the war ended. In 1945, Emil's world collapsed overnight. The Allies declared him a Nazi collaborator. He was banned from ever making films again. His assets were seized, his reputation was destroyed. He tried to claim he'd been forced to make those films, that he'd had no choice. Nobody believed him. There were too many photos of him at Nazi events, smiling with Goebbels, giving the Nazi salute. December 1945, Emil Jannings passed away in Austria, in a small house on a lake. He was only 65. The cause was liver cancer, but really he passed away of disgrace. His friends had abandoned him. His country had rejected him. His legacy was forever tainted. That Oscar, he was so proud of it, couldn't buy him redemption. The first Academy Award winner became the first to prove that talent without conscience means nothing. Some people lose their fortunes to bad luck or addiction or scandal. Emil Jannings lost his to a choice, the choice to side with evil. And unlike money, that's something you can never earn back. But even Nazi collaboration pales compared to the mystery surrounding our next star's end, Thomas Innes, the pioneer's mysterious end. Thomas Innes isn't a name most people know today. But without him, Hollywood as we know it wouldn't exist. He invented the studio system, the shooting script, the production schedule. He built the first major studio facility in Seville in Santa Monica. Every movie you've ever watched owes something to Thomas Innes. By 1924, he was 44 years old and worth millions. He owned his own studio, had production deals with major distributors, lived in a mansion in Benedict Canyon. He was also in negotiations for a major merger that would have made him one of the most powerful men in Hollywood. November 16, 1924, Inslhurst's yacht, the Ona, for a weekend cruise celebrating Innes' 44th birthday, also on board Hearst's mistress Marion Davies, Charlie Chaplin, writer Eleanor Glenn, actress Margaret Livingston, and various other Hollywood elite. What happened next depends on who you believe. The official story, and ate something that disagreed with him. Possibly bad liquor. This was prohibition. Developed severe indigestion. Was taken ashore at San Diego. Went home and passed away 2 days later of heart failure. The whispered story that's persisted for a century. Hearst caught Marion Davies with Chaplin in a compromising position. In a jealous rage, he pulled a weapon and fired. In the dark, he hit Innes by mistake. Here are the facts that don't add up. Innes' body was cremated immediately. No autopsy was performed despite his sudden passing at 44. The official documentation was signed by a doctor who wasn't there when Innes passed away. Every single person on that yacht developed selective amnesia about the weekend. Chaplin claimed he wasn't even there, though witnesses saw him board. Marion Davies never spoke about it publicly. Hearst banned any mention of the cruise in his newspapers. Luella Parsons, a struggling gossip columnist, was allegedly on the yacht. Right after Innes' passing, Hearst gave her a lifetime contract with his newspapers, making her the most powerful gossip columnist in Hollywood. Hush money? Nobody knows. Hearst supposedly set up a trust fund for Innes' widow. Nell, she never had to work again, lived comfortably until her passing in 1951. She also never ever talked about that weekend on the yacht. The district attorney of San Diego looked into it briefly, then suddenly didn't. The investigation was closed with no explanation. Here's what we know for certain. Thomas Ince, healthy 44-year-old millionaire, got on Hearst's yacht on November 16th. By November 19th, he was gone. Everything else is mystery. But the damage to his legacy was immediate and permanent. Instead of being remembered as the man who invented modern film, Thomas Ince is remembered as Hollywood's most famous unsolved mystery. His innovations forgotten, his contributions overshadowed by the question, was he the victim of foul play? His family lived under that shadow for generations. His sons tried to continue in the film business, but found doors closed to them. The Ince name had become synonymous with scandal and cover-up. The man who built Hollywood's foundation passed away under circumstances so suspicious that we're still talking about them a century later. His fortune couldn't buy him a proper investigation, and his innovations couldn't buy him a legacy untainted by suspicion. Drop a comment. Do you think was the victim of foul play? Because what happened to our next star is no mystery at all. Just pure tragedy. Mae Murray from Million Dollar Face to Charity Case. Mae Murray had what they called beast. Lips, that pouty look that became the beauty standard of the 1920s. She was huge, massive, one of the biggest stars of the silent era, commanding $7,500 weekly at her peak. She was also smart, negotiated her own contracts, demanded director approval, got percentages of her films. She understood the business side of Hollywood better than most actresses of her era. Then she made the mistake that destroyed everything. She fell in love with a con artist. David Mavani claimed to be Georgian royalty in exile. He and his brothers, they called themselves the Marrying Mavanis, made careers out of marrying wealthy women and taking their money. Barbara Hutton, the Woolworth heiress, lost millions to one brother. Mae would lose everything to David. They married in 1926. Mae was so in love, she signed over power of attorney to him. Everything she owned, he now controlled. Within a year, he'd spent or stolen it all. The money, the houses, the cars, everything, but the cruelest thing he did was take their son. When Mae finally wised up and filed for divorce in 1933, David had already moved the money offshore. He used his wealth, her wealth, to get custody of their son, Karan. Then he took the boy to Europe and Mae never saw him again. Never. Her son grew up thinking his mother had abandoned him. Meanwhile, talkies had arrived. And Mae's acting style, all that dramatic eye-rolling and hand-wringing that worked in silence, looked ridiculous with sound. She was unemployable at major studios almost overnight. She tried comeback after comeback, each one sadder than the last. By the 1940s, she was taking extra work. The former star, who'd commanded $7,500 weekly, was now happy to get $50 daily, standing in crowd scenes. The delusion started in the 1950s. She'd walk into studios demanding to see Mr. Mayer about her contract. Not understanding that Louis B. Mayer had been gone for years, she'd show up at premieres in ancient gowns. Trying to walk the red carpet with security gently escorting her away. Police found her wandering the streets of St. Louis, confused, penniless, claiming to be Mae Murray, the movie star. They thought she was just another confused homeless woman until someone recognized her. They put her in the Motion Picture Country Home, the charity home for destitute industry veterans. She lived there for 5 years, insisting she was still a star, that her prince would come for her, that her son would visit. None of it happened. March 23, 1965, Mae Murray passed away at the Motion Picture Country Home. She was 75. The nurses who cared for her had no idea she'd once been one of the biggest stars in Hollywood. To them, she was just another forgotten old woman with delusions of grandeur. Except the delusions had once been real. She really had been that star. She really had commanded those salaries. She really had been Hollywood royalty. She just made the mistake of trusting a prince who was really a thief. And finally, our last star story is perhaps the most perfectly tragic of all. Pola Negri, the vamp who loved too much. Polri was Hollywood's first European import. Paramount brought her over from Germany in 1922, specifically to compete with Metro's Greta Garbo. She was exotic, mysterious, sophisticated, everything American audiences associated with European glamour. She was also a survivor. Born in Poland, lived through World War I, made it to Berlin, became a star there. Then conquered Hollywood. She was tough, smart, and taking home $10,000 weekly by 1925. That's $150,000 weekly today. Then Rudolph of Valentino passed away, and Paula made the mistake that destroyed her career. She and Valentino had been lovers. Or maybe they hadn't. Nobody really knows for sure. It might have been real, might have been publicity, but when Valentino suddenly passed away in August 1926, Pola turned his funeral into her own personal performance. She fainted at the funeral, had to be carried out, collapsed at the graveside, made sure every photographer got the shot. She commissioned a massive floral arrangement spelling out Pola to sit by his coffin. She wore widow's weeds for months, giving interviews about her devastating loss. America hated it. They thought she was using Valentino's passing for publicity. The backlash was swift and vicious. Her next film, Hotel Imperial, flopped. The one after that did worse. Paramount started getting letters saying they'd boycott any film with that vampire in it. Then talks arrived, and Pola's thick Polish accent made her even less employable. She could speak English, but it was heavily accented. In an era when actors were supposed to speak like they'd gone to finishing school, Pola sounded exactly like what she was. A Polish immigrant. Paramount dropped her in 1928. She went back to Europe, made films in Germany and France. When World War II started, she was in France. She managed to get to Portugal, then back to America in 1941, but now she had a new problem. She'd made films for UFA, the German studio, in the 1930s. They weren't Nazi propaganda films, just regular movies. But try explaining that distinction to anyone in 1941. As far as Hollywood was concerned, she'd worked for the Nazis. She was completely blacklisted. The exotic vamp who'd once commanded $10,000 weekly couldn't get work as an extra. She moved to San Antonio, Texas, of all places. Why Texas? Because it was cheap and she was broke for the next 40 years. 40 years. Pola Negri lived in San Antonio, forgotten by Hollywood. She sold her jewelry piece by piece to survive. The woman who'd once worn million-dollar necklaces was pawning rings to pay rent. She wrote her memoirs in 1970, but publishers weren't interested. Who wanted to read about a silent film star? Nobody remembered. She self-published, spending her last savings and sold maybe 100 copies. August 1st, 1987, Pola Negri passed away in San Antonio at age 90. The local newspaper ran a small obituary. Most people in town had no idea they'd been living near a woman who'd once been one of the biggest stars in the world. Her funeral was attended by about a dozen people. No Hollywood representation, no acknowledgement from the industry she'd helped build. The exotic vamp who'd driven men wild, who'd commanded thousands per week, who'd loved too dramatically at Valentino's funeral, passed away quietly in Texas. Her fortune long gone, her fame not even a memory. 17 stars, 17 complete destructions. And now you know the pattern I promised to reveal. Every single one of these collapses was either caused, enabled, or covered up by the studio system itself. They addicted children to substances, then abandoned them when they couldn't work. They destroyed careers with blacklists based on lies. They stole fortunes through criminal mismanagement. They covered up mysterious circumstances, enabled addictions, and then pretended these people never existed. Roscoe Arbuckle, innocent, destroyed by newspaper lies. Judy Garland addicted at age 10 by MGM doctors. Wallace Reed kept under the influence by the studio to keep working. Marie Vost passed away alone while Hollywood looked away. Emil Jennings, the cautionary tale of choosing evil over conscience. Thomas Innes, possibly the victim of foul play, definitely covered up. These weren't random tragedies. This was systematic destruction. Here's my question for you. Which story shocked you most? Comment below, because I'm genuinely curious if it's the same one that kept me awake for 3 nights researching this. The studios made billions from these talents. But when the stars fell, when they needed help, Hollywood didn't just look away. They actively destroyed evidence, spread lies, and erased these people from history. Today's actors have unions, agents, lawyers, and some protection. Not perfect. Hollywood still destroys people, but better. These protections exist because of what happened to these 17 stars. Their suffering became the cautionary tales that forced a change. But here's what really haunts me. For every star whose story we know, how many others were destroyed and completely forgotten? How many talents were crushed before they even had a chance to shine? When you watch those old movies, when you see Judy singing or Buster Stoneface or Clara's It Girl charm, remember the price they paid. Remember that behind every perfect take was a human being who deserved so much better than they got. They gave us dreams. They gave us escape during the Depression, hope during war, laughter when the world was dark, and in return, Hollywood gave them addiction, abandonment, and erasure. These 17 stars didn't just lose their fortunes overnight. They lost their dignity, their health, their families, their sanity, and too often their lives. The golden age of Hollywood was built on their bones, and the industry hoped we'd never dig them up. But now you know. Now you've heard their stories, and maybe, just maybe, that's a kind of justice, the only kind we can give them now. Remember their names. Remember their stories, because Hollywood would prefer you forget. And that's the shocking truth about 17 classic stars who lost everything, and the system that made sure they did. These 17 legends deserved better, and the best way to honor their memory to make sure their stories are never forgotten again. By subscribing, you're joining a community that refuses to let Hollywood bury its victims. We're going to keep telling these stories, keep exposing the truth, and keep the memory of these incredible talents alive. Hit subscribe if you believe these stars deserve justice, even if it's just the justice of being remembered.